We're at 54 and verse 7, and let's begin with a quick prayer. Father, we ask your blessing on the people in the world who work for peace. We ask that the conflict in the Ukraine may end as soon as possible, and we ask for your consolation for all the families that have lost people on both sides of that war. We ask this in the name of Jesus, the Lord. Okay, 54, verse 7. He said, God speaking to the Jews now about the restoration. He said, I did forsake you for a moment, but in great compassion I shall take you back. So he says that, I separated myself from you. And again, it's the idea that when they separate themselves from God, they bring a punishment on them. But when I separate myself from God, the impression is that God has separated himself from me, which isn't the same thing, but that's the impression, the way we carry it. The thing I'd like you to notice is the word compassion. If you look in our tradition, we use a lot of different words with regards to God. Normally, we'll use the term Almighty. When we speak of God the Father, for instance, we normally use the term Almighty. But Muslims inevitably will use the word compassion. They say God the Compassionate consistently. And this, I find that fascinating because in my understanding of theology, the compassion of God is because of Jesus. That God certainly loves us, concerned for us, but to feel what a human being feels, to know what a human being feels is one thing, but to feel what a human being feels, you need to be a human being. And that's what compassion is. Compassion, the word passio, is what happens to you. In Greek, there's action and there's passion. Passion is what happens to you. It doesn't have to be bad. If you win the lottery, that's passion, okay? If you get punched in the face, that's passion, okay? But passion is what happens to you. Compassion is, the word calm is with or community or something like that. But anyway, compassion means you feel what another person feels. And the word compassion in Scripture, the best thing to describe it is, I don't know if you deal with musical instruments, but like what's called sympathetic vibration. If you pull a string on a guitar, the strings on either side will begin to vibrate. That's called sympathetic vibration. That in Latin is compassion, okay? So that's what compassion is. He says, in a flood of anger, for a moment I hid my face from you, but in everlasting love I've taken pity on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. And the two things, he says, in a moment of anger, but everlasting love. And he's contrasting that in the thing. And the other thing is the notice that they speak of, the Jews speak of Yahweh as Redeemer, like we speak of Jesus as Redeemer. But because of being brought out of Egypt in the time of slavery, they refer to God, the Father, as Redeemer. This will be for me as it was in the days of Noah, when I swore that Noah's floodwaters should never again cover the earth. And he's saying that when I saw the results of the flood, it's really fascinating when you read the things like that. Like God decides he's going to wipe all people off the face of the earth. And then he doesn't quite do that. He saves Noah, and they go on. But having seen what happened, God decides never to do it again. And it's the same thing, like having seen the Jews enslaved and Jerusalem destroyed and everything, God decides that won't happen again. So it's that sort of a thing. He says, so now I swear never to be angry with you and never to rebuke you. And I find that a powerful thing, that I will never be angry with you, because, like if you're angry with me, it usually isn't something you've done, it's something on my part. Like you cannot resolve never to be angry with me because you don't know what I'm going to do. And if you take a child, a child is capable of making you angry, and you are incapable of saying the child will never make you angry, you know. But God has said, you will never again make me angry. It says, the mountains may depart, the hills be shaken, but my faithful love will never leave you. And this faithful love is the word in Scripture, the really powerful word called hesed. And hesed is this bond of love that is just unbreakable. It cannot be separated. He says, my covenant of peace will never be shaken, says the Lord in his pity for you. Okay, so now God's going to rebuild them. And now we talk a little bit about the New Jerusalem. He says, unhappy city, storm-tossed and emptied. Okay, so when they were taken, they were destroyed and emptied. The people who lived there, who could get away, fled. I think I told you, to Cairo, and founded an area there known as Babylon. And Cairo itself built up around that. What they did was they fled to Egypt, and when they saw the pyramids, they knew they were in Egypt. But if you study Egyptian history, or if you go to Egypt, you'll find out that the ancient civilization is much further up the Nile, on an area called Karnak, where the Valley of the Kings and all that stuff is. But it's later that they started building in Cairo. And so the city was empty. Those that were taken as slaves went as slaves. Those that weren't fled to Egypt. It says, look, I shall lay your stones with fine mortar and your foundations on sapphires. Now, the idea of fine mortar, there's I don't know the name of it. There's a wonderful estate in Louisiana on one of the bayous that is a plantation house that was built during the period of slavery and stuff like that, and just a magnificent thing. But all that's left of it is a bunch of disintegrating pillars. And the fact is, the people they put to build the house were these African slaves, and they didn't really understand about the whole business. And so they used salt water when they made the mortar and everything. And I think you know the rain and everything dissolves the salt out of that over a period of time. And so it disintegrates. So this fine mortar is that they would get someone who would really know what the mortar is. Because you can use that. If you could make mortar out of salt water, you could build a building. It lasts maybe 100 years or something. I mean, it isn't going to go down like that. But God help your grandchildren. So the idea is that you don't do that. But he says, I'm going to use fine mortar. And the foundation on sapphires. When we think of sapphires, we think of a beautiful stone. But you know, sapphire is a very, very hard material. And in fact, they make normally the case for a watch, what appears to be glass on a watch is normally sapphire. And they're made synthetic. You make synthetic sapphire. But that's normally sapphire because that's such a hard material and clear. Okay? Sapphires, rubies, and emeralds are all basically the same stone. They're aluminum oxide, and aluminum oxide is clear, and that's why aluminum appears not to rust. The rust on aluminum is clear, okay? But if aluminum oxide forms near copper, it's tinted green, and it becomes an emerald. If it's near cobalt, it's tinted blue, it becomes a blue sapphire. If it's near nothing, it becomes what's called a clear sapphire. And if it's near iron, it turns red, becomes a ruby. Okay? So they go on this way. But anyway, they're referring to here mainly because of the strength of the sapphire. As you can imagine, in the ancient world, they couldn't cut those stones. So if you looked at, if you go to let's say the Papal Museum, for instance. There's a Vatican Museum, but the Vatican Museum has jewelry that's 2,000 years old there, that was given to the church by Constantine and stuff like this. And oftentimes they have stones that have been, I guess, like tumbled, so that they're polished that way, but they don't have any particular shape to them. They're rather free form, and that's the way things were in the ancient world. So sapphires and stuff were not considered as valuable as we would. The most valuable precious stone in the ancient world, the pearl. And that's because you don't have to do anything to it. It comes out the way you use it. He says, I shall make your battlements rubies, your gateways carbuncle, and your enclosure precious stones. Okay? So the carbuncle, again, which is basically looks like the ruby. They're probably using the ruby and the carbuncle as a reference to the blood of God that will protect it, prophesying more about the Christian's situation than the Jewish, but that it would be seen as blood. All your children will be taught by the Lord, and great will be your children's prosperity. And notice he's talking about their prosperity won't be really great. And why won't it be great? Because when they come back, they were never trained in God's law. And once you're trained in God's law, then that leads to prosperity. And we've talked a little bit about this, but one of the things about Jewish law, it's very, very friendly to nature. And I think I've told you about the idea that you plow a field with round the corners because that belongs to nesting birds. You're not allowed to raise animals in any way where the animal is fearful. And let's say a cow may never see its calf killed, and a calf may never see its mother killed. They have all kinds of things that are geared around. And they now know that one of the things that can be harmful to us is eating the meat from an animal that died in terror. It releases all kinds of stuff in the animal. And so it's adrenaline. It releases all kinds of adrenaline in the animal. So anyway, he says, you will be established in saving justice, far removed from oppression. And again, this idea that we talked about, the nature thing, with people, it's justice. It's the idea of learning to see justice. And when we talk about God historically, justice is where you have to start. Justice is the thing you need to demand. And once you have justice, so that everyone is treated justly, that breaks up the kind of things that puts people at odds with one another. People are at odds with one another because someone has something that I don't have. Now, in the history of the United States, it used to be that in general, if someone had something that I don't have, that they were willing to work for it and I wasn't. So it wasn't a huge amount of sympathy. But over a period of time, we've discovered like the blacks and the Hispanics have really been denied the rights to get to money the way whites did and stuff like that. But initially the idea was that the justice is what would bring peace in society. Once you have justice, then you can begin to move to what's called mercy. But you can't have mercy until you have justice, okay? So he says, you will have nothing to fear, free from terror, for it will not approach you. So their enemies wouldn't come. And I told you before that one of the big problems with their enemies, they usually fell as a society or as a city. They usually fell after some time when they had been, divided religiously. And so under the impact of the religion, they would, allow the pagans and stuff like that in. And when they allowed the pagans, The religious thing divided them, and then they weren't united when they had another attack of some kind. He said, should anyone attack you, it will not be my doing, and whoever quarrels with you will fall at your side. So I'll deal with your opponents. Look, I created the blacksmith who blows on the charcoal fire to produce a weapon for their purpose. I also created the destroyer to make havoc. So this idea, he says that I created the destroyer, so I'm the one who makes the armies, I'm the one who creates the people. And this idea that he's going to make sure that he's not bringing this about. He's not going to allow these people to rise up in these different areas. One of the things that they oftentimes would do, like particularly when they conquered a city like Jerusalem, is they took all blacksmiths and stuff like that would all be taken as slaves. Crafts were very valuable, like being a carpenter, like Jesus. Crafts were very valuable in the ancient world. So he says, no weapon forged against you is going to succeed, and any voice raised against you in court will be silenced. Okay? So he says, you have no enemies in the community, you have no enemies outside. He says, such is the lot of the servants of the Lord. They're saving justice from me, declares the Lord. So that's the way he's going to construct them. And this book is called the Book of Consolation, and it's because it has this kind of, restoration thing. And now we go through the chapter 55, which is kind of, I would say 55 is basically a canticle, and it's a canticle to celebrate the way God is taking care of Israel. So as he says, you who are thirsty, come to the water. You who have no money, come, buy, and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money, for free. Why spend your money on what cannot nourish, and your savings on what fails to satisfy? And basically what God's saying is what they're supposed to do is enter this relationship with the law, to learn the law. And if they learn the law, they'll be more successful in their farming, they'll be more successful in the way they deal with nature, they'll be more successful in their society. But the whole thing will function in a very different way if they learn the law. And learning the law is free. And so that's what you're supposed to be about. And then all these things will happen. But he says you spend your money on what cannot nourish and earnings on what fails to satisfy. And I think it's really interesting in society. I think particularly as a priest, we see a lot of this, and you see more of it as you get older because you've watched people over a length of time. But it's amazing the goals that people will pick out and pursue to their obvious destruction. And like someone who goes after, like I went to a very high-powered school in San Diego, and it was difficult to get in the school, and anyone who had money in the whole area went to that school because of the education. And I think for the last, when I went, this is when I went to my 50th high school reunion. At that time, the preceding 11 years, all of their seniors had completed college, not just gotten in, but all of them were either in college or had graduated, but no one had skipped college. It was a really high-powered thing. But it was interesting in watching what people went in to do when I was in the school. Some people went in for things they really loved, and like for instance, a guy went in who was, he was very interested in law. I think his dad was a lawyer too. But anyway, he became a lawyer, and he was one of the Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court of California. And one of them was very intrigued with the listening devices and spy work and everything. And he was head of the CIA for Europe. And myself here at the mission, we were the only 3 people still working when I went to my 50th anniversary. But there were some people who, even, when we were going through school, they were interested in money. That was really what they were focused on. And they, at the 50th reunion, were very, very wealthy. But to a man, they had all been divorced. And you just kind of watched how the things, people don't seem to see the consequences kind of what they choose, And there were a couple of them that had very serious breakdowns. And largely because if you go into a field just for money, you can end up doing something you don't want to do 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it's just, I don't know if you heard, England is going to begin to experiment with the 4-day work week. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because in Europe, when they did that, production went way up. And they found it ended up being a very, very good thing in Europe. That's why Europe has so many days off and everything. It really helps production. So he says, listen carefully to me. Have good things to eat, rich food to enjoy. Pay attention. Come to me, listen, and you will live. So God says, listen to my law. You'll have good food. You'll have everything that you need. Just listen to the law, and you get that free. He says, I will make an everlasting covenant with you, the mercies of my steadfast love for David. So classically, the one that God made the greatest personal commitment to was David. And you remember he promised a descendant of David would always be on the throne, and just all kinds of things. But he made this strong commitment. And you remember that David was not a saint. Technically, he is a saint in the church. But David, he was guilty of murder. He was guilty of adultery. And he'd killed so many people that God did not allow him to build the temple. I mean, we go through a lot of things. But David was a very faithful man to God. He would fall and he would repent and he would take the penalties and all this sort of thing. And so God saw this powerful, powerful commitment to David that would go way beyond David through his descendants. And actually, the end of it all, of the promises to David, was in fact that a descendant of his was the Messiah. In fact, a descendant of David's was God. It's remarkable. He says, look, I've put him as a witness to peoples, a leader and lawgiver to peoples. Look, you will summon a nation unknown to you. Nations unknown to you will hurry to you for the sake of the Lord your God, because the Holy One of Israel has made you glorious. What he's saying now is, if you follow this law, you'll be so prosperous that other nations will notice you and want to go. And there are a couple things that I think the Israeli way of dealing with animals has become a big thing now. And the idea, of free-range chickens and all that sort of stuff. This idea is a growing thing in business. And the idea of the land being set aside in different ways that the Jews do, that's become a big thing. And people are always looking at kosher food, because kosher food is very, very healthy. I don't think it tastes good, okay? I'm not fond of most kosher food, but it is extremely healthy. And so people, try and emulate it. I thought it was funny that every time I would take a tour to Israel, people eat on a vacation more than they normally eat at home. And to a person, they lost weight. And it's not because of the volume you're eating, it's because of what you're eating. The way it's a very, very good thing. So he says all this, and he says once they do that, then nations who you don't even know about yet will end up coming to you. They will hear about you, even though you don't know about them. And they will come to you. And for us, that's the prophecy of the Gentiles entering the community. And places they didn't know anything about. They didn't know anything about the United States. They didn't know anything about the islands of the Pacific. I mean, all kinds, Australia, all that stuff. And yet the faith is in all those areas now. He says, seek the Lord while he is to be found. Call to him while he is near. And where we see this in Roman Catholic theology is a reference to death. Like one of the dictums you learn in theology is no person merits anything after death. And no person commits a sin after death. After death, that's your judgment. That's it. It isn't going to go worse or better after that. That's just it. And that in human life, to realize that I have the opportunity today to live the life for which I would like to be judged, or not. But I will not have that opportunity immediately after I die. That opportunity will be gone. And I think there are a lot of things like that in human life that are matters of an opportunity at a moment, and it may be taken or may not, and I look at this in a lot of things where people make very strong commitments and then sort of back away from them because they don't take the incentive to do it when they have the commitment. I probably have shared this with you before because it's one of my favorite scenes in a movie. There's a movie, and I think the character in the movie is Burt Reynolds, but I could be wrong. But it was many years ago, the movie. But anyway, he is always very depressed about a love relationship or something. I forget what it is. But he wants to commit suicide. So he goes out in the ocean and swims out as far as he can. And finally he's exhausted, so he's there waiting to die. And suddenly he changes his mind. And he looks at the beach and he says, Lord, if you save me, I'll dedicate my entire life to you. And then he starts back, and he's getting closer. So he turns again. Lord, if I make it back, I will give 2 days of every week to you. But anyway, it gets all diminished by the time he reaches the beach. Lord, if I get up on the beach, I'm going to light a candle in your honor. And that's it. But I think a lot of people have really powerful moments like that. I remember a friend of mine, a young man, who was with us on a tour to Europe on one time, and he wanted, I don't know if you've ever been to Mount Saint Michel. It's in France. It's a kind of an island, and the island is in the center of quicksand. And so it's one piece of France that's never been conquered by England. And it's just a little off of the coast. And it's in this swampy area. And when the tide is high, it's an island. And when the tide is low, then there are the mud flats around it. And the tide is high twice a day and low twice a day. And if you drive out, there's a drive out, a bell will go off to warn you that the tide's coming in so you can go back. Now, if you're in the hotel or there, you can park in an area that's off to the side. But if you're not staying overnight there, you need to leave each time the tide comes in, this sort of thing. But the idea of this friend of mine, we were there, and the top part where the church and stuff is still a monastery. And he had this powerful, powerful deal that he felt he wanted to stay there and become a monk. And he could have done it. He could have stayed there and decided, what later on if he was going to be a monk. But the more he thought about it, he decided he would do that when he got home and that sort. And I think he missed the moment. I think he could have done it. I think if he had stayed, he would have stayed. He wouldn't have ultimately have left at all. Because when he talked to me about it, I said, I can freeze your ticket so that your ticket can be used anytime. I could do that. And if you go back, you want to go back and stuff. But I think a lot of times we can look in our lives and see a moment we had where we're about something good or something like that, and just never quite pulled it off. And later on, we believe that an inspiration from God comes encased with the grace to do it. And that oftentimes, if I let the moment pass, the grace to do it is gone, the strength, but the idea is still there. And oftentimes, if you read the lives of saints, oftentimes that it's encased in such craziness that it's frightening. Like God telling Francis, take off all your clothes and walk out of the church. But he did it and then became Francis of Assisi. And you can study a lot of famous saints have had these just really bizarre calls, but they've seized it and gone on with it. But this idea of learning when God's near and being open to what he's asking. Let the wicked abandon their ways and the sinful their thoughts. And this idea that in this call from God, be ready to leave behind whatever's going on, okay? Let them turn back to the Lord, that he may have mercy on them, to our God, for he is rich in forgiveness. So we turn to God, and when we turn to God, we always get forgiveness, and the mercy of God allows us to go on. So he's basically saying that whatever situation you're in, you can turn to God at that moment, always. And that's one of the basic things that we try to communicate to people in the church about this idea of the ability to change. And that's incidentally one of the things that drives Pope Francis crazy about bishops excommunicating people. That once you're excommunicated, it's as though it's over, But as long as you can keep some kind of a relationship with the church, then maybe you go on. One of the things that I really like about Augustine, in his Confessions, one of the things he says, I never fell into the error of explaining my sin as not being sin. So, like for instance, if you have something in your life that you can't get over, let's say like alcoholism, that's ruining your life, you can't get over it. The temptation is to say, well, it's natural for me and it's just something I kind of have to live with. It's probably not sinful for me. And then if you ever get the grace to convert, you can't convert away from it because it's not a sin. And so you lose that. So St. Augustine said, I always knew what was a sin and what wasn't. And I knew certain things were sins that I simply couldn't give up. But I knew they were sins. And he never gave that up. And then when grace came to him, he was able, to sort it out. And I think a lot of people, there's certain things you just, for whatever reason, you do not have the strength to get out of. And that doesn't mean you're going to go to hell or anything like that. But to always maintain this link somehow to God, that you're open to the possibility that if you ever get the strength, you'll do it. You ever have the power to do it. And I think I've told you Matt Talbot is probably going to be canonized in the next few years. And Matt Talbot was a hopeless alcoholic. spent his entire life traveling to shrines, praying to get over his alcoholism, and died in a drunken stupor in Paris. That probably visiting one of the shrines in Paris to be cured. But he never got over it. But he's going to be canonized as a saint because he was always open to it and seeking to it. He just didn't realize it in his life. And he says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, declares the Lord." I think this is one of the most powerful texts in the Bible. And God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways, declares the Lord." One of the things we tend to think about God in terms that are very different from God. If you were to look at Pope Benedict, when Pope Benedict became Pope, we had the silk robes, we had the jewelry, we had all this stuff. And if you were to ask him why he was doing it, he would say, for the glory of God, that the ceremonies are magnificent and all that sort of thing. And Francis has moved away from that, gets away from all that. But the fact of the matter is, was it for the glory of God? Sure, it was for the glory of God. Did God appreciate that kind of glory? Probably not, probably not. And you think of another example. I was a teacher in an extremely exclusive school outside San Francisco called San Domenico. And it's in a valley surrounded by hills. So you can't see the school from anywhere. And the schools there, it's a girls' school. And it's a girls' high school. And it's run by the Dominican nuns, the same ones that run Santa Catalina. And most of the students there are children of movie stars and stuff like that. And it would be interesting that at Christmas time, I remember one thing specifically. One of the young ladies, one Christmas, received from her parents as a gift a London taxi cab. The whole taxi cab was mailed. And I don't know if you've been to London. They have these neat taxi cabs with the glass between you and the guy. They're very formal. They're great cabs. But anyway, or they used to be. So anyway, she got it for Christmas, but she didn't see either of her parents for Christmas. Now, they probably thought that was a wonderful gift, but she would have preferred they visit her for Christmas. And I would say that probably a quarter of the students in this school would see their parents only a couple times a year and never would stay with their parents, even at a summer program where they could stay there at the school. And it wasn't classes and things, but the idea is, I'm thinking, what would I enjoy? Well, that isn't necessarily what another person enjoys. I think if I were to go back in my youth, the most common gift that I would give my mother on Mother's Day, birthdays and everything, was See's chocolates. Not that she didn't like See's chocolates, but I liked See's chocolates, and I probably ate more of them than she did. But this idea of what actually appeals to the other, well, to think that way with regards to God, that one of the meditations, I think it comes from Cyril of Jerusalem, but he says, what does God want from me? He says, does God want my brains? He says, God's never going to ask me for advice, period. He doesn't need advice from me. Does he need my strength? God's stronger than you. He goes through the whole thing. He says, the one thing I have to offer God that he does not have, stupidity, weakness, sinfulness, that all the negative things are what God wants from me, because they're the only thing he doesn't have. All the other stuff he has. And I believe that God calls people to do jobs just so that they can get the credit, because God always does it through them. When God calls you to do something, the temptation is it's terrible or it's difficult or something like that. But that's not really true. The fact is, if God calls you to do something, he's going to do it. He just needs a human front man or whatever it is, Anyway, he says, for as the heavens are high above the earth, so are my ways above your ways, my thoughts above your thoughts. And these things are so far, beyond us that they can't be considered. This next verse, again, returns to the whole notion of the teaching. He says, just as the rain and the snow come down from the sky and do not return before watering the earth, making it, fertilizing it, and making it germinate, to provide seed for the sower and food to eat, so it is with the word that goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me unfulfilled, or before carrying out my purpose and achieving what it was sent to do. What he's saying is that the word of God comes on us like rain, and that rain inevitably produces of itself what's going on. Now, we live in a very good example of that. Like when I would go off to teach places and come back, coming in on a plane, I could tell you how long it had been since it rained in San Luis. Because, we get very little rain and the hills turn to like green velvet. And then slowly it goes down from that. And we go through that cycle when we get rain. But we go through that cycle. But he says his word is inevitably that way. That's the reason the Catholic Church uses the word of God in everything we do. So like when I was a youngster, when we had a confirmation, we didn't necessarily do a Bible reading. When I had my confirmation, it took place at a benediction, not at a mass, And so, but now, every sacrament, there is a scripture reading. And then every time we go to a service, there's a scripture, because we believe that this scripture just washing over us ultimately will accomplish, what it does. I remember one time in a class, the professor was talking about this verse, and he says, it falls just like water falling on rocks. And one of the guys in the class said, which is our normal experience, water falling on a rock doesn't do anything. But the response to the professor was instantaneous. You need to visit the Grand Canyon. And the thing is, water takes a long time to do it, but it is inevitable what it will do. And that's what he says about the Word of God. It's absolutely inevitable. Okay? So we'll call it there. That's 55:12. And we'll see if we have any questions.